All right, so let's dive into this fascinating world of Aussie politics. It's February 2025, and with the federal election coming up pretty soon, the political landscape is well buzzing, I'd say. You guys have sent in a whole bunch of opinion pieces, all published on February 18th, and they really give us like a really clear picture of this, crucial moment down under. So we'll be covering all sorts of things, from those really close polls and the cost of living, which is a huge debate, of course, to the leaders' body language. Even by the end of this deep dive, you'll have a really good grasp of all the key issues and players in Australian politics right now.
It's interesting how these opinion pieces go beyond just like the surface. They offer insight into how voters are feeling and the subtle ways that leadership image is crafted and perceived.
Exactly. And speaking of tight races, the polls are showing a total dead heat between the two big parties. It's sitting at 48-48 on a two-party preferred basis. So it really is anyone's game at this point.
Yeah, it really reminds me of the 2010 election, Julia Gillard's minority government. That was a great example of how independent MPs can actually gain a lot of influence in this kind of situation. Just imagine the potential for political maneuvering and deal-making.
Yeah, for sure. One commentator even said that the potential prime minister choices could be between, and this is a quote, a pipsqueak or a potato.
Wow, that's a pretty colorful way to put it, but I guess it shows how concerned some people are about the potential instability and legislative gridlock that a hung parliament could bring. We'll have to wait and see how voters weigh those factors when they actually vote.
Yeah, for sure. Let's move on to an issue that's pretty much at the forefront for most Australians, the cost of living. I mean, no surprise that this topic is dominating the election debates, especially with the recent interest rate cut. It's the first one since the pandemic hit.
Yeah, this rate cut has become a real battleground. The current government is saying that it's proof of their good economic management, that it offers some much-needed relief.
But then at the same time, the opposition is saying, well, hang on a second. What about those 12 rate hikes that came before this recent cut? They're arguing that those increases are a direct result of the government's bad economic decisions. Mismanagement, you could say.
Yeah, Josh Butler from The Guardian said, and I quote, "Will Australians remember Labor for one rate cut or the 12 hikes before that?" I mean, this question really gets to how voters think and how they'll weigh this recent rate cut against the longer history of rising rates.
It's a tough one for sure. It's like weighing a feather against a whole stack of bricks. Speaking of trying to win over voters, let's look at Peter Dutton's proposed war on the public service. He's proposing some pretty big cuts to try and save money. What are your thoughts on that approach?
Well, it's definitely a bold strategy, but I don't think it's without risks. When governments cut public services, we often see the quality of those services go down, which can really impact those who rely on them the most.
Some commentators are even saying it's like what's been happening in the U.S., where there's this trend of undermining public institutions, which is concerning to say the least.
Yeah, and they're saying that Australians should be careful about making the same mistakes. Some people argue that if Labor doesn't really get across how valuable these services are, and the link between taxes and what those taxes pay for Dutton's message might actually resonate with voters who want smaller government and lower taxes. But it's important to think about the long-term effects of that.
Yeah, totally. It's a very complex issue with a lot of different potential consequences. Now let's switch gears and look at how leadership is perceived. It's interesting how this plays into the whole election story. There's this analysis that says that even though Peter Dutton is positioning himself as the underdog, he might actually be winning the perception race as a more authoritative figure.
Yeah, it's really fascinating, actually. A body language expert has even weighed in and said that Dutton's posture and his tone and his demeanor all project this strong sense of authority, especially compared to Albanese. It really makes you think about how these subconscious cues can affect how voters decide.
Yeah, I mean, are voters more swayed by appearances than they even realize? Are we all kind of susceptible to these subtle cues when we're sizing up potential leaders?
It's certainly possible. I mean, we tend to be drawn to people who project competence and competence, right? People who seem like they have a handle on things. That kind of authority can be really powerful, whether it reflects the candidate's actual ability or not.
It makes you think about the different leadership styles we see in this election. Dutton is portrayed as this strong, assertive figure, while Albanese seems to be more like a steady hand because he's the incumbent. It's like a real-time case study in how leadership can be different.
Exactly. And it'll be interesting to see which style connects better with voters. Will they want Dutton's perceived strength? Or will they go for Albanese's experience and more collaborative style? This election isn't just about picking a person. It's about making a decision that shapes how Australia will be in the future.
For sure. Speaking of the future, we talked before about foreign policy and the Lowy Institute's idea of national resilience. What would that actually look like in practice? How would those recommendations change things for everyday Australians?
Well, national resilience in this context means being ready for a world where the usual alliances and global stuff is changing. Australia needs to be smart about its relationship with both the US and China, which could mean doing trade with more different countries, making sure we can make more things ourselves here in Australia, and maybe even rethinking how much we rely on fossil fuels and investing in renewable energy.
So it's not just about picking a side in some global power struggle. It's more about finding our own independent path that's good for Australia, no matter who's in charge in other countries.
Exactly. And these changes could have a real impact on how we live. Imagine if Australia wasn't so reliant on stuff from other countries, then we could have way more manufacturer jobs here. Or think about how good it would be to move to renewable energy, not just for the environment, but for our energy independence and making energy cheaper as well.
Yeah, that makes this whole national resilience thing seem much more real and relevant to people's lives, right? Now let's come back to things here at home. We were talking earlier about what the Race Discrimination Commissioner said about racism increasing in Australia. How do you think that might affect the election? What are some specific issues or concerns that voters should be thinking about?
Well, this whole situation has really put a spotlight on racial equality. It's challenging politicians to do more than just talk about social cohesion. They need to actually address the issue in a way that makes a difference. Voters should really be looking at how each party plans to tackle this systemic discrimination. Look beyond the nice words and see what concrete policies they're proposing.
It's like the commissioner saying, okay, you talk about unity, but what are you actually doing to get rid of the stuff that causes inequality?
Yeah, and this issue is bigger than just morals. It affects the economy too.
Oh, how so? How does racial inequality actually impact the economy?
Well, if a society is divided by prejudice and discrimination, it just can't reach its full potential. People don't get the same opportunities, innovation is held back, and in the end, everyone suffers. But if you have a society that's fairer, it creates a level playing field where everyone can use their talents and ideas, and that helps the economy grow and makes everyone more prosperous.
So tackling racism is good for the economy as well as being the right thing to do.
Exactly, and that's a message that can appeal to voters across the political spectrum. You can really see that Australians are getting tired of just hearing words. They want to see real action on this.
It does feel like there's a shift in how Australians think about these social issues. Now people are less tolerant of empty talk and want real solutions. Which brings us back to those super close polls we talked about before. With all these complex issues happening, it's no wonder voters are feeling a bit uncertain.
Absolutely. This election is shaping up to be one of the most important in recent times. It's not just about choosing a leader or a party. It's about deciding what kind of future Australia wants, both here at home and in the world.
It's a good reminder that each vote really matters, and that elections are about way more than just personalities and slogans.
And there's another big part of this whole thing that we haven't even talked about yet. The media plays a huge role in shaping how people talk about things, setting the agenda and controlling the story of the election.
Oh yeah, the media always a big player, especially during an election.
And with all the different media we have now, with information spreading like crazy on social media and echo chambers, it's getting harder and harder to know what's true and what's not, and to tell if reporting is biased or objective.
It's like everyone's stuck in their own little bubble, only seeing news and opinions that agree with what they already think. So how can voters figure out what's going on and make good decisions?
It's definitely not easy, but it can be done. The key is to think critically about the information you're getting. Don't just believe everything you see and hear. Look for different points of view.
So don't just rely on the same news sources or what pops up on your social media. Try to find different opinions and try to understand why people believe what they do, even if you don't agree with them.
Exactly. It's about being a little skeptical and being open to ideas that might make you uncomfortable or that you might not agree with. It's not always about finding some middle ground. It's more about understanding that the truth is usually complicated and has many sides.
Yeah, that's a really important point. And it gets to what this whole deep dive is about, encouraging people to think critically and understand all the different aspects of the issues that are shaping Australia's future. We've covered so much today, from the economy and how leaders act, to foreign policy, social justice, and the role of the media. It's a lot to take in.
It is, but you have to remember that all these things are connected. They're all part of this big, complex system that makes up Australia.
And in the end, it's up to each voter to decide what kind of future they want for this country.
And to hold the people they elect accountable for making that future happen.
We've gone through so much in this deep dive, but there's still more to explore. So stay tuned for part 3, where we'll go even deeper into the stuff that's influencing this super important election.
Welcome back. It's pretty amazing how all these different things we've been talking about, the economy, leadership, foreign policy, social issues, they're all connected and they're all shaping this election year.
Yeah, it really does feel like we're putting together a puzzle, doesn't it? Each piece gives us a different view of what Australians are thinking and feeling right now. What stood out to you the most so far?
You know, that analysis of body language and how much it might actually affect voters, it's a reminder that elections aren't just about the policies, but also about how candidates present themselves, how they're perceived.
It really got me thinking, how much do those little cues influence me when I'm looking at leaders? Do we all make decisions based on those things without even knowing it?
It could be. I mean, we tend to like people who seem confident and capable, right? People who look like they know what they're doing. That sense of authority can be really strong, regardless of whether the candidate is actually that good.
Makes me think about the different leadership styles we're seeing in this election. Dutton being shown as this strong and assertive guy, while Albanese is more like the steady hand since he's already in the job. It's like we're seeing two completely different approaches to leadership playing out right now.
You got it. And it'll be interesting to see which one works better with voters. Will they be drawn to Dutton because he seems strong, or will they prefer Albanese's experience and more collaborative style? I mean, this election isn't just about choosing a leader. It's about making a choice that will affect what Australia becomes.
Speaking of the future, we touched on foreign policy earlier and that whole national resilience thing the Lowy Institute is talking about. What would that look like if it actually happened? What kinds of changes would everyday Australians see if they followed those recommendations?
National resilience in this case means getting ready for a world where our old alliances and the way things work globally are changing. Australia's going to have to be really smart about how it handles its relationship with both the US and China. That could mean trading with a wider range of countries, strengthening our own manufacturing industry, and maybe even rethinking how much we depend on fossil fuels and putting more effort into renewables.
So it's not as simple as just picking a side in some global power struggle. It's more about making sure Australia's interests are looked after, no matter who's in charge of other countries, right?
Exactly, and these changes could really change the way we live. Imagine if we weren't so reliant on imports, we could see a huge increase in manufacturing jobs. Or think about the benefits of switching to renewable energy. It'd be good for the environment, but it would also mean we wouldn't have to rely on other countries for energy, and it could make energy cheaper.
Yeah, that definitely makes the whole national resilience thing seem much more concrete, like something that could actually affect people's lives. Let's get back to some of the domestic issues. We talked about the race discrimination commissioners warning about racism increasing in Australia. How do you think that's going to play out in the election? What are some specific things voters should be paying attention to?
Well, this whole thing has really brought racial equality to the forefront. It's like a challenge to politicians to actually do something meaningful instead of just talking about social cohesion. Voters should be looking at how each party is planning to address systemic discrimination, not just listening to their words, but looking at what policies they're actually proposing.
It's like he's saying, you can talk about unity all you want, but what are you actually going to do to fix the things that are causing inequality?
That's right. And this is about more than just doing the right thing. It has real economic implications, too.
Can you explain that? How does racial inequality affect the economy?
If you have a society that's divided by prejudice and discrimination, it can't reach its full potential. People don't get the same opportunity. Innovation is stifled, and ultimately everyone is worse off. But a fairer society creates a level playing field where everyone can contribute their talents and ideas, and that leads to economic growth and everyone benefits.
So addressing racism is both the right thing to do and good for the economy.
You got it. And that's something that should appeal to voters across the political spectrum. It seems like Australians are fed up with just hearing empty promises. They want to see real action.
Yeah, there's definitely a sense that things are changing in terms of how Australians view these social issues. There's less tolerance for empty talk and a growing demand for real solutions. And that brings us back to those really close polls we discussed. With so much going on and so many complex issues to consider, it's no surprise that voters are feeling a bit uncertain.
Absolutely. This election is shaping up to be one of the most significant we've seen in a long time. It's not just about choosing a leader or a party. It's about deciding what kind of future we want for Australia, both domestically and on the world stage.
It's a good reminder that every single vote counts, and that elections are about much more than personalities and slogans.
And there's another crucial element in all of this that we haven't even touched on yet. The media. The media plays such a powerful role in shaping public discourse, setting the agenda, and framing the whole narrative of the election.
Ah, yes. The media always a force to be reckoned with, especially in an election year.
And in today's media landscape, with information spreading so rapidly across social media and all these echo chambers, it's becoming increasingly difficult to separate fact from fiction, to distinguish between biased reporting and objective analysis.
Yeah, it's like everyone is living in their own little information bubble, surrounded by news and opinions that just reinforce what they already believe. So how can voters navigate this complex information environment and make informed decisions?
It's a real challenge, but it's not impossible. The key is to be a critical consumer of information. Question everything. Don't take anything at face value, and seek out a variety of perspectives.
So don't just rely on your usual news sources or what your social media algorithms feed you. Go out and actively look for different viewpoints and challenge yourself to understand why people hold certain beliefs, even if you don't agree with them.
Exactly. It's about cultivating a healthy sense of skepticism and being willing to engage with ideas that might make you uncomfortable or challenge your own beliefs. It's not always about finding some kind of middle ground, but rather about recognizing that the truth is often complex and multifaceted.
That's a really powerful message, and it really speaks to the core of what this deep dive is all about. Encouraging critical thinking and a more nuanced understanding of the issues that are shaping Australia's future. We've covered so much ground today, from the economy and leadership styles to foreign policy, social justice, and the role of the media. It's a lot to process.
It is, but it's important to remember that all these issues are interconnected. They're all part of the same complex system that is Australian society.
And ultimately, it's up to each individual voter to decide what kind of future they want for this country.
And to hold their elected officials accountable for delivering on that vision.
We've covered an incredible amount of ground in this deep dive, but there's still more to explore. Stay tuned for part 3, where we'll delve even deeper into the forces that are shaping this pivotal election. Welcome back to our deep dive into Australian politics. Leading up to this federal election, we've been looking at the economy, leadership styles, foreign policy, social justice, and of course the media's influence. It's pretty clear that Australia is at a crucial point with some big decisions to be made, both here and on the world stage.
It's really interesting how all these different things seem to be coming together at the same time, isn't it? Creates a real sense of urgency, like we need to make some big decisions.
Yeah, it does feel like we're at a crossroads, like all these different pressures are building up. Makes me think, with all these factors involved, what are the big questions voters should be asking themselves before they go and vote?
Well, I think one of the most basic questions is, what kind of country do we want Australia to be? Do we want to focus on ourselves, on protecting what we have, or do we want to be more outward-looking, more engaged with the rest of the world?
That's a big question, isn't it? It's about what we value and where we see ourselves in the world.
Exactly. And once we've thought about that, the next big question is, who's the best person to lead us into that future?
Yeah, that's right. It's not just about looking at their policies, but also their leadership skills, their experience, where their vision is, and whether they can handle all these complicated challenges.
Exactly. And of course, we can't forget about the actual policies themselves. Voters really need to think about whether those policies match up with what they want for Australia's future. Will they actually do what they say they will? Will they create a fairer and more just society? Will they tackle things like climate change, inequality, and the rising cost of living?
There's a lot to think about before you cast your vote. It's not just a matter of ticking a box, is it? It's about actually shaping the future of the country.
And it's important to remember these aren't just abstract political debates. These issues have a real impact on people's lives.
So it's not enough to just vote for whoever seems the nicest or follow the same party you always have.
Voters need to really engage with what's being discussed. They need to do their research, think critically, and vote based on what they genuinely believe is best for the country, not just what's best for them personally.
That's a pretty powerful message and a lot of responsibility. As we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one key thing you want our listeners to take away from all this?
I'd say it's this. The future of Australia is in the hands of its people. The decisions they make when they vote will have an impact on the whole country. And even beyond, it's not something to be taken lightly. This is a time to get involved, to be informed, and to make your voice heard.
It's a call to action, really a reminder that we all have a part to play in creating the future we want. Democracy isn't just about watching from the sidelines. It's about participating, thinking critically, and actively getting involved. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Australian politics. We hope you found it insightful and empowering.
And remember, the power to shape Australia's future is in each of us.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.